Okay, the Joint Committee, Public Utilities and Legislation will come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Williamson, Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Green.
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Present.
Alderman Ogilvy, Alderman Mohammed, Alderman Oldenburg, Chairman Ingracia,
Present.
Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard, Alderman Ornowitz,
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Ogilvy, Alderwoman Navarro,
Present.
Alderwoman Middlebrook,
Present.
Chairman Vaccaro, Alderman Williamson, Alderwoman Tyus, Alderman Ogilvy, Alderman Mohammed, Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Ogilvy, Chairman Vaccaro, 6 present.
Thank you. So thanks for being here this afternoon. We have a presentation from Ameren. Stephanie Robinson, I guess, can do an introduction, followed up by a Q&A with John Kauffman with the Consumer Council of Missouri.
Get started?
Go ahead and get started, yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, or good afternoon, I should say. My name is Stephanie Robinson. I am a community customer relationship manager with Ameren Missouri, and with me today I have Rick Eastman. He is a government relations executive, and also Marty Cortez. She is the director of business and community relations. Today we're going to be talking about and presenting the 2018 energy policy legislation, and I'm looking at the time, it's, what is it, 1:06, so we'll go on and just jump right into it, okay? I'm going to pass out a few items for you guys to look at while we're doing the presentation.
Thank you, folks. Is it okay if I stand here? Do you want me over the mic?
Microphone, yeah.
So you're starting to like people stand down.
I don't have a lot of PowerPoint slides, 8 or 9 slides, but normally 10 or 15 minutes. Is that too long?
That's perfect.
Okay. All right, guys, I know it's kind of a long ways to see that screen, but I wanted to get these slides up so you could see them. So Ameren, Missouri, like many other businesses, we do focus groups and we talk to our customers all the time. And in our most recent round of messaging, really over the last year or so, when we talk to our customers, they tell us 3 things that they expect from Ameren, Missouri as their energy provider. They said, we want an energy grid that is smart, one that is secure, and one that is stable. And stable also has to do with energy prices. So I've got just a few slides. I will talk about each of those elements today. You have handouts in front of you. The first one is the smart, secure, and stable fact sheet that I have for you. The second one you should have in your stack is a list of businesses, organizations, and associations that support this 2018 energy policy legislation. And the third sheet is our Power Forward Community Action Network handout. On the website, thepowerforwardmo.com, it also has much more information about this presentation that I will talk to you about. Just real quick, before I forget to do this later, take a look at that list of supporters. Even though it's relatively small this year, it was much larger for the 2017 energy policy legislation, but we have some large industrial customers, we have restaurants, fast food restaurants, hotels, chambers of commerce from all over the state, including Cape Girardeau, Columbia, Jefferson City, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have the Missouri Economic Development Council and support. That's one that represents 350 economic developers statewide. They see the jobs potential and the investment potential of this energy policy legislation. Some larger companies you may know from St. Louis, Sachs Electric Company, and a couple of others, as well as some banks. And the one I want to point out at the last is the Consumer Energy Alliance. We've talked to a lot of consumer groups, and the people that represent low and fixed income that we've talked to, including the Missouri Grocers Association and the Missouri Retailers Association, also have come out in support of this legislation. So with that, let me walk you through these slides. Again, there'll be a quiz at the end. So the 3 S's are what? Smart, secure, stable. So as you know, I've been with Ameren Union Electric a long time. This is my 34th year. And since 1904, Union Electric, and now Ameren Missouri, has been the energy provider for the city of St. Louis. And then as we began to bring our wholly owned subsidiaries in back in 1983, we grew the company through that series of mergers in the early 80s, and then we began to acquire Illinois utilities when we created Ameren 20 years ago. So today, just on the Missouri side, we talk about 1.2 million electric meters. That's how many customers we have. That's how many actual meters on homes and businesses. But when you look at the number of Missouri residents that get their energy from Ameren, Missouri, it's half of the state's population, 3 million people. When you roll in the other two investor-owned electric utilities that are supportive of this legislation, Kansas City Power and Light and Empire District Electric near Joplin, it's about 4 million of Missouri's 6 million residents get their energy from one of the three investor-owned energy companies. So again, our company's been in business for more than 100 years. I always would normally show a picture of the 1904 World's Fair here at Forest Park and would tell you it was a chilly night when I took that photo, but I won't go there. So certainly we are committed to doing more for our customers tomorrow as we have done in the past. The three key S words I've talked about, again, our customers say we want a smart grid because all of us have some kind of a smartphone near us or on our hip right now. People expect more from us in the way of smart energy applications. Our sister company, Ameren Illinois, when legislation was passed in that state in 2011, has installed smart meters as a result of that bill passage in Illinois. And most of our customers in Illinois now are seeing their electric rates go down, and they have many more features and apps on their phones and devices than what we have in Missouri. So most of you, when I'm out in the public doing presentations, will say, you know, I would love in the wintertime to be at my office at 5 or 5:30 p.m., get on an app and raise my thermostat at home a couple of degrees before I get there. But I can't do that because Ameren, Missouri doesn't have any smart grid technology. So that's one element of this that we certainly want to address our customers' demands or needs for is smart energy. Secure energy, you guys know that every single day you'll read some story, it seems like, from around the nation or the world where somebody has hacked into a business and stolen information or, in some cases, shut down the energy grid. Our customers and our focus groups are telling us we want a secure grid that someone half a world away cannot hack into and take down our energy grid and leave us without electricity for hours, weeks, or months. And the stable part, guys, every time I go out and talk to our customers about energy policy, they said, Rick, we call you every year and we ask if you're going to have a rate case. And I said, well, I don't know yet. And they go, if you do, how much would you ask for? How much of an increase? Well, I have no idea. And they said, what would the PSC authorize? And I said, I really don't have any idea. So for most businesses that are trying to budget one of their top 2 or 3 line item operating costs, which is energy, it's maddening for them to not know what's coming when. So if it's an 8% increase 1 year, 2 years later it's 12%, it's very frustrating for business owners. So residential, commercial, and industrial customers alike have come to us and said, if we knew we were going to have a modern energy grid through investments, but we knew what was coming when, and you were keeping increases very low and incremental, predictable, and stable, we would certainly support that. So this legislation has 3% annual rate caps in the legislation. The Missouri electric rates have gone up 4 times faster than the national average over the last 10 years. The average increase for electricity annually for the last 10 years has been 6% per year. So we have worked with all of our consumer groups, our industrials, all these other customers who have talked to us and said, if you would cap it at half of that, at 3% annually, we would certainly be supportive of that. So that's what this legislation contains. So the next 3 slides really just elaborate on those 3 S's, the smart, secure, and stable. So I won't try to read all this to you because it's a long ways away. But basically, that's what we're talking about, a smarter grid that has more features, more controls, so customers can manage their own energy bills more readily at home or through applications on their phone or smart devices. The secure grid, not just cybersecurity, but physical security. So many of the utilities around the country have been worried about somebody like a sniper who would shoot out insulators in a substation and take customers out of power. That happened in near the Silicon Valley in California 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a devastating thing. So hardening the grid against physical and cyber attacks is what the second S refers to. Also, protecting our customers' data. Many of you, if you're an Ameren Missouri customer, maybe pay your electric bill online like I do. I live in Jeff City, so I have both electricity and natural gas from Ameren Missouri. So I pay my bill online, but again, after the Anthem breach, the Target breach, Equifax breach, there have been so many instances where personal information was stolen. Our customers are saying, do not let our information get hacked and stolen. So this is another piece of this legislation that would support security in that regard as well. And the stable piece, again, this goes back to the rate caps, guys. It talks about that on your handout. Customers are saying, we understand major investments are needed because we have a very aging electric grid. You guys, of all customers of ours, have seen some downtown underground problems with transformers over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, really since about 2013. And it does take customers out of energy. And so as we would work to invest and modernize our grid, we have to do it in a way that does not harm our customers financially. And that's why these rate caps are so vitally important to this legislation. I know you can't read that either, but we just talk about being involved in the community. Ameren employees have donated and volunteered more than 10,000 hours of volunteer time. We are a top 100 military employer. We hire many veterans at Ameren, and that's something that many of my presentations out in the community, they always ask me, how many veterans come to work at Ameren? And there are hundreds. We're very proud of that. And thirdly, in 2017, Fortune magazine voted Ameren, Missouri as a great place to work, and we were certified as such. So that sounds good to me. Having been there almost 34 years, I'm proud to work for Ameren, Missouri. It's been a wonderful company, and we're striving hard to get this energy bill passed because that's what our customers are really asking us to do. So if this bill passes, what's the plan? Legislators have asked us that, and so have public service commissioners. In 2016, September 23rd of 2016, Ameren, Missouri filed a 5-year grid modernization plan with the PSC. In that plan, it's very detailed on how much of this additional $1 billion would be spent over the next 5 years by type. So much for substations, so much for overhead, so much for underground electric, so much for transformers, smart meters, transmission. All of that was delineated in that plan. So right now, Ameren, Missouri spends about $800 million a year, each year, on maintaining and keeping the grid current the best we can. Much of this infrastructure that we put in place was put in place in the 50s and 60s, and it's reaching its end of life. That's why we're investing $800 million a year. We think to begin to catch up with this aging equipment, we certainly could add another $200 million a year to that, which would put us at $200 million a year for 5 years. That's where the additional $1 billion energy grid investment comes from. So that's where that number comes from. Again, I didn't bring that spreadsheet, but if you look at the PSC's website, it shows exactly where those dollars would be invested. I've also taken those dollars and broken it down by geographic area around the state. Senator Nasheed, this part of the city is in her district. Certainly our Ameren headquarters building is in there, and she's looking at not only the investment in the energy grid, but the jobs it would create. 3,300 new direct and indirect jobs would be created through implementation of this 5-year grid modernization plan. And I forget the exact number, but I think the number's 400 to 500 to maybe 600 of those jobs would be in Senator Nasheed's district. So she's been very supportive, saying, I want the jobs growth in my district, in the city. So I think that's important that she has been very supportive. And my last couple of slides, guys, you probably saw the Integrated Resource Plan announcement probably 5 or 6 months ago now. Ameren, Missouri will, over time, move away from coal generation. Our oldest coal plant, we have 4 of them. Our oldest one is in its 65th or 67th year of operation. It's the Merrimack Energy Center south of St. Louis down on I-55. That plant will be retired no later than 2022. So as that comes offline, we want to replace the older coal generation with more renewables. So in our Integrated Resource Plan filing with the PSC about 6 months ago, that was what we committed to. We will replace much of that coal generation with 700 megawatts of new wind energy by 2020, by the end of 2020. So that's our plan, to bring more wind into our grid. Right now, we have about 100 megawatts of wind energy. We don't own that. We wheel that in from an Iowa wind farm. But this would be, we believe, owned and operated, hopefully within the state's borders. Then by 2027, we will bring another 100 megawatts of solar energy on. Today we have a O'Fallon, Missouri solar farm that has about 6 megawatts of energy, but we want to increase that by 10 times by 2027. So renewable energy is very good, it's clean, it's carbon-free, and that's certainly our commitment. Some people have come up to me and said, but President Trump said, no, the Clean Power Plan, we're not going to do that anymore. You don't have to worry about carbon emissions. We said, no, it's the right thing to do. We will continue to move away from coal over time. It won't be overnight, but certainly that's our plan and our direction. There will be some natural gas generation brought into the mix because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So we have to be mindful of that. Those are more intermittent sources, and we still have to have some baseload generation. I spent 15 years of my career working out at our Callaway Energy Center, which is our nuclear plant, which I love nuclear power dearly, but that's one of the things we will also consider to think about down the road, is possibly that carbon-free generation. And you can see the carbon emission reductions. These are based against 2005 numbers, actuals. So by 2050, we will produce 80% less carbon than we did in 2005. And my last slide, guys, 46 other states have passed energy policy similar to what you see before the Missouri legislature today. In fact, some of it's more farther reaching than what's before our legislature. But 46 other states have passed energy policy legislation. And as you know, we've talked about this with you guys last year and the previous years. It's so important. You know, I've spent my entire life as a Missourian. So I'm from the Show Me State. I grew up about an hour and a half north of St. Louis. I love being from Missouri, but we are slowly becoming not the Show Me State, but the Slow Me State. I really am concerned that we are slipping behind when it comes to energy policy and building a modern energy grid for our customers. So 46 other states have passed legislation. The 2017 list of supporters, which was longer than this one, we had more than 180 on it. We're rebuilding this based on the rate caps energy policy statement, so that's why you see that still growing and not the 180 on there, but that's what we have had. And the Power Forward website is mentioned at the bottom. So I guess in summary, guys, smart, secure, and stable. That's the three words that our customers tell us are the most important to them, and what those three words stand for and mean. So I hope if there is an endorsement ever to come from this board or the full board of aldermen, we would certainly welcome that and be happy to add your name to this list. That's what I have for you. Questions for me?
Alderman Williamson?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. The windmill, I had a question about the Windmill Farms. So, is there any plans to put any windmill farms in the state of Missouri to help generate electricity?
Our engineers are looking at that now. We would like to locate as much of those 700 megawatts in the state if we can. Northwest Missouri has a little bit better wind for that advantage than in some other parts of the state. So if they're not built right in Missouri, they would be built in a neighboring state adjacent to us, is what I understand today.
So that's why I guess it's been piped in from Iowa, is that they get a little bit more wind than we do in the state. Is that the reason why they have a more accessible wind to generate more energy? Is the reason why they have a farm and we don't? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. When we first contracted with the Horizon Wind Farm in Iowa about 10 years ago, they had a farm already built, and they were willing to sell some of that power, so Ameren Missouri bought that. We contract for that, and we wheel that into the grid to our customers now. So again, we've had about 100 megawatts, a little over 100, probably for the last 10 years or so. But we want to expand that, like we said, by sevenfold.
Okay. And those 3,300 jobs, what type of jobs will they be? What would they entail, and what would be the average pay? You know, what are their responsibility? Are they technical job, technicians, or can you elaborate a little bit more what type of jobs they would be if this bill is passed?
The 3,300 would be both direct and indirect jobs. So some of those would be in the way of technicians, maybe line workers, smart meter technicians, but some of those would also be the economic spin-off jobs that would be created by having new construction in the area. So some of those would be directly associated with installing the energy grid. I can tell you, Ameren, Illinois, our sister company, since legislation passed in 2011 there, our Ameren, Illinois utility has hired 650 new permanent jobs and about 1,200 contractor jobs to do this work. So I don't know the exact, economic throughput with restaurants and hotels, et cetera, but to put the smart grid in Illinois, Ameren, Illinois has hired 650 permanent new jobs since 2011 and about 1,200 contractor jobs.
Do you have an estimate how many permanent jobs will be out of this 3,000?
I don't know for sure, but the ratios would probably be very similar to what we've seen in Illinois.
Okay. So the majority of the energy in the state of Missouri is generated with natural gas, and I guess you mentioned that we do have one coal plant, right?
Four. We actually have four that Ameren, Missouri owns, yeah.
Okay. And they're on their way of being eliminated, right?
The first one of those four is our oldest. The Merrimack Energy Center will be retired by the end of 2022.
Okay. And What about the nuclear plants? How many, do we just have one nuclear plant?
We have only one in the state and only one commercial nuclear plant that Ameren, Missouri owns and operates, or that Ameren Corporation owns and operates. We don't own any in Illinois, but the Callaway Energy Center is near Fulton, and I live in Jefferson City, so it's pretty close to Jeff City. And I worked there for 15 years, but it generates 1,200 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 800,000 average homes. And again, no carbon comes from that plant. It's not burning anything. It's just fission that creates the heat and makes our electricity through generating steam that way.
So the bottom line, if, and I know we don't have any legislation in front of us right now, but if we do create a bill and we pass it, what would be the cost to the residents of the city of St. Louis if we did come up with a bill with the new energy plan?
Again, based on what we've seen, average electric rate increases to be annually for the last 10 years, they've gone up 6% per year. That's 4 times faster than the national average. Today, Missouri still has relatively low electric rates, but we are closing that gap quickly. We know in the next 3 to 5 years we will pass the national average for the price of electricity if we don't do something like pass this energy policy legislation. This legislation would cap those future rate increases for the next 5 years at 3%, but the front end of that would have a 3-year rate moratorium. There would be no increases for 3 years from the time the last rate increase was implemented, and for us that was May of 2017. So no rate increases for 3 years from that point per this proposed legislation, and then a 3% annual rate cap after that. There's a 5-year sunset provision in this legislation, and at the end of the 5 years, the Public Service Commission could have the opportunity to renew this program if they think it's benefiting customers the way we anticipate it will.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Alderman Vaccaro?
They fixed the microphones, but they didn't oil the thing. So the energy, we sell it to the grid, which comes from another state anyway, right? And it all comes, we sell to the grid. We sell electric onto the grid and we buy off the grid, right?
There are some off-system sales is the term we use. We're part of the larger
Right.
mid-continent independent system operator, which is based in Indianapolis. But we generate power for our customers. If there's excess, we're allowed to sell that out of state. And any profits made from that, 95% of those profits flow back through to our customers, which helps keep our rates as low as we have so far.
And we have the hydro plants,
We have hydroelectric plants, we do.
Right.
3 of
And
those.
right? We have the 3 hydro. And then on the coal, you know, not that, but how many people are we going to put out of work in the coal industry? I'm just curious. I know we're talking about the jobs we're going to gain, but I'm also, there's a lot of people in this state that earn their money in coal mines. And I'm just curious, how many people are we going to displace in areas that rely on that coal as a source of income?
I don't have any numbers for jobs displacement as a result of that. I know that a normal fossil plant, a coal plant that makes electricity, the typical end of life for those is about 60 years. So right now, we would keep our 3 younger plants running, but that oldest one that's already over 60 years would be the one that's retired. And there are probably 200 to 300 employees that would be impacted at just our Merrimack Energy Center.
I'm sorry, I heard somebody yelling. So the coal, though, and the nuclear run all the time, where we have to count on wind that is off and on, and the hydro plants only kick in when we have a boost, because it's the easiest energy to turn on and turn off as we need it under. So if we start eliminating the ones that are sustainable, that are always on, doesn't that become an issue?
They would certainly not all be eliminated. You would still see baseload generating stations in service. So there would still be some coal plants, and certainly the nuclear plant, we just got a 20-year license extension a year and a half or so ago. So that plant, Callaway, will operate until 2044. So that's baseload 24/7 energy that you talked about. And then natural gas would make up some of that difference. Many utilities are moving to more natural gas combustion turbine generation. We have some of those plants already, but there could be possibly more of those in the future to replace or offset some of the retirement of the Merrimack Energy Center.
and there's no possibility of more hydro plants?
There could be, I guess. It's very difficult, I think, in America today to dam up any more rivers or streams, so I'm not sure hydro would be the first choice for many utilities in the country, but it's certainly a clean option.
Because I actually toured with Ameren all the different plants, and it seemed like the most sustainable, the two most used are coal and the nuclear plant. And of course, the gas ones with the jet engines are not as used, and then the hydro's used if this is a high energy. I just get concerned if we start relying solely on solar and wind, that you're going to have the issue. You know, again, it's not the coal plants never turn off, and when you shut down that or the nuclear plant, it takes days to get it back up and online whenever they shut them down to clean them. You know, and that's just my concern. If we start relying more on just wind, I could see incorporating, but I just get nervous when they start saying we're going to eliminate coal.
Yeah, I didn't mean to infer we would totally eliminate it. We will reduce what we depend on for coal for generation. But guys, honestly, that's why Ameren Missouri has been so strong of a good diverse generation mix. We have coal, we have nuclear, we have hydro, we have natural gas, we have wind and solar, we have the methane plant in Maryland Heights. So we have a good diverse mix of how we get our electricity for our customers. And I think that's a strength of ours, not depending on any one type of energy exclusively to make that electricity for our customers.
And then just last question, that would be how much energy do we sell onto the grid that we don't use?
It would depend on our own demands. You know, if it's real hot or real cold, certainly our customers will always come first. If the independent system operator to support the grid in other states calls for energy, we may generate some more to support that, but I don't have a percentage that I could give you.
So we're not having any issues generating as much energy as we need for Missouri and actually having access if we want to.
Periodically, there could be enough to sell to neighboring states, but no, we certainly have enough to meet our own customers' needs, and that's the priority.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Arnowitz?
No questions at this time.
Alderwoman Green?
Thank you. So I'm reading through SB 564 right now, and there's a couple things that are sticking out to me that seem a little problematic. You keep referring to this as a 3% rate cap. The bill doesn't actually say a rate cap. It says a rate threshold and provides liabilities for if you are to increase over that threshold. Those liabilities are $25 million for a company your size,
Correct.
who had a profit last year of $653 million. So it seems to me like there would be a huge incentive to raise it above that 3% threshold and pay that $25 million, which would be a drop in the bucket compared to what you would make otherwise.
Certainly, there have been some adjustments to the legislative language. Last night, there was a Senate substitute that was filed or brought up on the floor in the Senate during debate, and it has firmed up that 3% cap, so it really truly is a 3% cap with everything under it, the transmission, the cybersecurity trackers, those things that we heard in Senate Commerce Committee were concerns have now been brought under that cap. The intent is certainly not to exceed that because the penalty, that $25 million penalty, would offset any benefit that Ameren Missouri would derive by having this program in place. So the intent would not be to exceed that. If you were to exceed, per the legislative language, 3.75%, then you're kicked out of that program and not be allowed to return. So it's certainly our intent to adhere to those caps, to not exceed that, and we realize there would be a significant penalty. That would offset, again, any benefits or savings we would derive by being in the program if we were to exceed that.
Okay, I guess the substitute or whatever it was isn't online yet, so I would really like to see that language.
Okay.
The other question I have is, the Trump tax cut should be allowing you to have quite an influx of money. And so what is that, the purpose of that tax cut, as the president would sell it, is to create jobs. And so how much of that tax cut money would be going into building up the grid and supporting these jobs and then passing those savings along to consumers?
Right now, the Missouri Public Service Commission has opened a docket to review the the difference in the tax reduction and what that would mean for taxes Ameren Missouri would pay. Right now, I don't have a decision on what we would do in Missouri, but we are certainly looking at that. Our rates folks and attorneys folks, they're all looking at that to decide what's the best time to return that to our consumers. I'm sure at some point that will happen. I would not mix that with this energy policy legislation. They are two completely separate things at this point. And so right now, the 3% rate cap, the energy grid investments of an additional $1 billion over the next 5 years, that's really the genesis and the heart of this legislation now.
So where is that $1 billion coming from?
That will come from borrowed capital, some of it, but certainly we will also have our investors, stockholders, and our revenues that come from our ratepayers would all go in, as it does today, to help fund some of these projects.
Okay. The other, I guess, question I have, looking at the supporter list here, I don't see any organizations that are kind of public watchdog organizations or organizations that are looking out for consumers. It seems to be mostly large businesses that have signed on to this. Have you done engagement with organizations outside of the business community who, or why aren't those organizations on here? Why isn't there more diversity, I guess, of organizations?
Yeah. I can't answer that. We've certainly talked with a lot of the groups. I think the one group that is probably the closest aligned with what you're asking about is the Consumer Energy Alliance. That's 450,000 citizens in America that are members of Consumer Energy Alliance. And they are very supportive of this because they see the benefit in grid modernization, but at the same time protecting customers' rates from exorbitant hikes. So that's a group that probably aligned with what you're asking about.
And going back, actually, going back to what I was asking a minute ago, another question popped into my head. So when you're saying that the $1 billion is going to be a combination of money that you have from your shareholders that the company holds, from consumers, what percentage of revenue coming from consumers are we expecting that will make up that $1 billion?
I don't have that breakdown of, how much comes from revenues, how much is borrowed capital. Typically for these investments, for transmission, substations, overhead underground, typically that's borrowed capital. It's a very capital-intensive industry, all utilities, water, sewer, natural gas, electric. And so I don't have a breakdown of that, but the ratio, I would imagine, will be very similar to what it is today, but we certainly would commit to an additional $200 million incremental spend on top of the $800 million we're spending today.
And do you know what that breakdown is currently? You just said very similar to what it is today.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it is, but
Okay.
we don't plan to adjust much. And certainly, with the rate caps, customers' rates will be protected. And again, that's what our customers have asked us for. They said, we understand grid modernization is vitally important to meet the first two S's, the smart and secure. But we have got to keep our rates stable, and we have to know what's coming when to be able to make this work.
Okay. That's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To go off kind of a couple of the things that my colleague from the 15th Ward was discussing with you, the rate caps. Can you talk about more specifically how this committee substitute disincentivizes the going above and beyond the rate caps? I didn't understand exactly how that committee substitute was allegedly doing that. I know that was a major concern in the Senate hearings last week. Many of the senators were pointing to not only, so we have what's called a soft rate cap in here. What the bill also does is provide quite a few mechanisms to go around that rate cap, to go around the Public Service Commission and introduce increases without public scrutiny and without public hearings. Am I right? Can we describe some of those? For example, adding the transmission costs, being able to increase rates based on those costs without going before the Public Service Commission.
Those have all been folded in under the cap now. So you would not have anything outside of that, either the transmission that would go through the fuel adjustment charge. You would not see the cyber trackers. All of that would be capped under that firm 3% cap. Again, because that's what we heard in the committee hearing from several of the senators and some of the opponents who testified against the legislation as it was. They said we would like to see a solid or firm cap. And now, with the Senate substitute, that's what we have.
Going to the smart grid, can you talk about this? These are investments that we're already making. Am I right? Ameren's already making investments in smart grid technology.
It's limited. What we have now, and we have some shining examples, and I know you've seen some on TV spots that Ameren Missouri has put on local stations in St. Louis. You've seen examples through some press releases and other places as we've done some of these smart grid investments. But so much more needs to be done. These are shining examples of what we can do. For instance, smart switches will help eliminate or reduce power outages, and that's what our customers tell us to. We don't want power outages, and we have done a pretty good job, even without having a fully integrated smart grid, in reducing the number of outages. But our outages, when customers are out, they're out longer than peer utility customers. Our outages are fewer in number, but much longer when they do occur. And that's what smart grid technology can help us do. They can avoid some outages altogether or shorten them, because if a smart switch can reroute power to a different power line, then customers may not ever be out of power and they won't even know the difference. And we can do that before we'd send a crew out to walk down that line and see what was causing the problem. So the smart grid is really designed to help with that too, as well as giving customers more access to their energy usage.
The corporate tax breaks, I realize that the Public Service Commission has opened up a docket on this, but many utility companies across the country are offering their own plan to reduce costs to their consumers, recognizing that, as my colleague pointed out, this is a huge windfall to your profit, your bottom line. The reduction in corporate tax is a 40% reduction from 35% to 21%. And utilities are regulated by the state of Missouri, and those rates are set based on a corporate tax rate of 35%, not 21%. So that's a huge increase. Now, every month that sort of goes by that we don't pass that savings along to our consumers is extra profit that goes into your bottom line instead of being passed on to consumers. Can you describe why Ameren hasn't put forth a plan to pass those savings along to its consumers like many other utility companies across the country have done?
I can't speak for other utilities. I do know, again, our team is looking at that and developing a plan, working with the Missouri Public Service Commission, and I think you'll see something in the very near term. I just don't know what that will look like yet.
Okay. Again, every month we drag our feet on this is extra money that consumers are paying that they shouldn't have to pay. And so I'm just hopeful that our Public Service Commission and our utility companies can move that forward a little more quickly. One of the significant oppositions that we heard in the Senate hearings a couple of weeks ago were large employers in the area coming before the Senate to describe the major impacts that rate increases will have on their ability to hire and keep employed St. Louis and other regional employees. Can you describe, I know you talked about jobs, but how many jobs does Ameren have within the city of St. Louis? And I don't mean the region, I mean how many city residents is Ameren employing?
I'm sorry, I don't have that number for just St. Louis specific, but Ameren Missouri in aggregate employs about 3,800 employees statewide. But I don't know the breakdown just for St. Louis, but we can get those numbers for you.
That would be helpful, because I know some of our city's largest employers who employ significantly more people than 3,800 is statewide, and of course St. Louis makes a very small percentage of that 3,800, and we're looking at employers that employ a lot more just in the city that came down and expressed grave concern and even opposition to these bills, recognizing that the large increases in utility costs will have a significant impact on their bottom line, and i.e. their ability to keep St. Louis City residents employed here. And so that's a concern not only for our residents, but for our city's economy.
Back to the jobs, I would say St. Louis probably has the largest percentage of Ameren, Missouri employees. I don't know what the breakdown is. But again, you know, Kirksville and
In the
Excelsior
city or the St. Louis region?
Well, the St.
Because the
Louis
city
region.
makes only 10% of the St. Louis region, and so my concern would be this 3,800 is grossly exaggerated when we're talking about just city residents.
Talking about the city limits specifically.
Exactly,
Okay,
because
I
that is
don't
the
know
body, you know, we're the city, you know, we care about our city residents here, and if you're
Certainly.
employing St. Louis County residents, that's well and good for St. Louis County, but doesn't do much for us.
We will get that breakdown for you.
Okay.
Let me address the industrial customers. So many of them have come to us over the last year, and they said, you know, we cannot sustain this 6% increase annually in electricity rates as a state. Yes, some did testify in opposition, and I think that's in large part because those three elements that we brought in, mostly the firm cap element, is what they were asking for. Now that we've done that, we certainly believe these industrial customers will be supportive of this because they know they can't sustain these increases. What they've told us, they said, we're looking at ways to either come off the grid and generate our own power or to leave Missouri. And if that happens, all that does is harm the rest of the customer base. So we're working hard to keep our industrial customers here. Their electric rates have gone up even faster than our residential and commercial customers. The large industries rates have come up quicker and are closer to the national average than even those other two groupings of customers. And so as they talked to us, they said, we've got to do something. The status quo is not acceptable, it's not sustainable, and if you don't get some kind of a rate cap provision in here, we really will have to look at either generating our own power or just leave Missouri entirely. And we're working hard to keep that from happening.
I have no further questions.
Alderwoman Navarro?
Thank you. So the city of St. Louis passed a 100% clean energy resolution earlier, or last fall. And so I'm curious what this legislation would do above and beyond what Ameren's requirements already are, or what you're already planning to do regarding renewable energy.
Yeah, these are the biggest impacts you'll see, that integrated resource plan with the 700 megawatts of wind coming in the next 3 years. So that's the first big step. Also, this legislation, though, allows for more microgrids and others, more locally owned solar to be brought into the grid and work even better, or your big box stores that say we're going to have solar panels on our roofs and how we can incorporate those. So this type of legislation supports and enables both utility scale or universal scale solar and wind, and that's owned by customers. So this type of legislation supports all of that. And it really is sort of the linchpin that triggers all of these other large investments.
The IRP is already in place, though, right? I mean, that's separate from this piece of legislation.
is.
So is any of that new, is any of that couldn't happen without this legislation?
Well, it could happen and it will happen without the legislation, but why would you generate all of this new modern green energy, carbon-free energy, and send it into an older grid? We're trying to modernize the grid to be able to support that and take that energy and make sure it's all a 21st century energy grid.
So this piece of legislation is essentially a pre-approval for 5 years, correct, for spending the $1 billion?
Oh, well, it would authorize, the plan, the 5-year grid plan is a condition that the PSC has said, if this legislation is passed, we need to have a detailed plan of what you're going to do where the money would be invested, on what types of projects. So that's something that's a requirement of the legislation. So we filed that a year and a half ago almost to say, here's our plan for what we would do. So beyond that, that would be something that we would move forward with, doing these projects area by area, state by state, or county by county, and you could see those investments and what they would do and the jobs they would create. So much of that's in that plan filed with the PSC.
So is there a list of specific projects now that could be reviewed as to why this legislation is necessary?
Look at that on the website, or we can get you that spreadsheet, but it lists over the next 5 years, again, how many millions of dollars on transmission, smart meters, overhead, underground, all that's delineated in that plan.
So is it dollar signs, or are there actual projects connected to those allocations?
They're dollar signs, but it lists the type, they're spelled out by type of project. So I don't know if I have specific street address names on there, but we can get you some more of that information. But it's pretty well delineated. The first year of the 5-year plan is very specific. Years 2, 3, 4, and 5 are less specific, but it's a sliding plan. The detailed plan comes annually with an update. But year 1 is pretty well defined right now.
So I guess, why does it have to be, what's the purpose of the 5 years now? I mean, it seems like that's removing some oversight year by year by year? Why does it have to be 5 years set out in this legislation the way that it is?
Well, this is actually what we worked with the PSC toward, because they want to see the commitment to these investments, just like our customers do. A 5-year plan like this would give us that 3-year moratorium, which keeps rates frozen where they are since the last rate increase, with those caps after that. So the 5 years is enough of a trial that the PSC says, okay, if this is prudent, if it's benefiting consumers in our state, then we could consider renewing that for the second 5-year window. But it's set up on that 5-year block again, because that's what pretty much the policymakers have asked us for, and the customers said we would like to have enough time to get this predictability and stability of our rates established. And that's really what's partly behind the 5-year plan.
So when I looked through the legislation, I didn't see any, there's no specific commitment to renewable energy projects in there, is there?
Outside of the IRP? you're
Outside
talking
of the
about?
IRP.
Yeah, the legislation really would just be accommodating, again, for microgrids and more modern technologies that would come in. I don't have specifics. It's not like.
So it allows for that, but there's no commitment on behalf of Ameren that there will be a renewable energy commitment in this legislation, that will come out of this legislation.
Tied specifically to the legislation, I'll have to look again. I don't think it says that specifically, but again, the commitment is to those other numbers I showed you on wind and solar.
Yeah, and I understand commitments, and that's why I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out exactly what it would call for, because we did pass 100% clean energy unanimously, and the city of St. Louis would like to move forward with that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see the connection of how this would advance, the city of St. Louis as well as for the state of Missouri. So that's what I'm kind of looking for, is
Yeah.
where is more than just a stated commitment, which you already have in your IRP, but what does this legislation actually advance in terms of a promise to consumers about renewable energy?
Right. And we have folks that work for Ameren Missouri that can talk to you more specifically about that than I can. But I'm happy to set up a meeting and we can have that discussion. So the legislation could be the focal point for that, but also to make it easier for the city to meet its renewable goals.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Alderwoman Middlebrook? No questions. Does anybody have any further questions?
So this legislation that we're discussing today is in the state legislature. The St. Louis City Board of Aldermen has arguably no influence over the state legislature. Can you just describe why you're coming before this body to even discuss this legislation?
Jeff, if there's something with a proclamation, I was just asked to be here to present about the legislation.
We don't have any legislation before us, which is why
Or a bill.
we don't have a bill, a resolution, any kind of action.
Well, we'll actually be asking for you guys to possibly get an ordinance in place to support this, and you become one of the supporters for the legislation. But what's most important is that we want you guys to, because you guys work directly with the consumers, and I get a lot of questions or concerns and things from you guys where I have to research things and maybe come back to you with some things, but I'm a consumer too, so I like to make sure that since I'm seeing you every Friday, and I want to make sure that you guys are aware of everything that we're doing and just being transparent. So that's why we're here today.
Are you going before other city councils across the state?
But we have, yes.
What other city councils have you gone before?
Steph, you guys have done more in the St. Louis area, but
We've been Missouri, the Municipal League of Metro St. Louis. We've done Missouri Municipal League. We are talking to all of the municipalities in St. Louis County. We have spoken with the block federations of St. Louis, for the city. So we're talking to any large group that we can get this information out to, because basically we want you to know what's going on. So we're talking to everybody.
Are you looking to pass resolutions or ordinances in other municipal governments?
Yes, absolutely.
Which governments are you looking to pass resolutions in?
Well, St. Louis County,
So the county, like the St. Louis County Council?
St. Louis County Council, yes.
And something similar, a resolution supporting legislation in the state?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
If I may?
Sure.
So guys, just so you know, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry has supported, I've mentioned that. The St. Louis Regional Chamber is supportive of this legislation. And we have talked to so many groups. Guys, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm not too many years away from retirement. I want to do this because it's good for me and my family. My mother lives an hour and a half north of me. She's 82 on fixed income. My father passed away 5 years ago. I want to do the right thing for our consumers, whether they're low income, fixed income, seniors, or all of our customers, large, small, industrial. So I believe, guys, we've come before you and so many groups over the last several years asking for the need to push energy policy forward for energy grid investment. We have never had rate caps before. We've heard the consumer's voice to add this. We have done this. I believe it's the perfect balance to get this done this year, to get the investments, but to keep customers' rates reasonable and affordable. And believe me, if I do anything to harm my mother, you all are going to hear about it. So, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've taken a lot of your time.
One other question,
Yes,
just
sir.
briefly. In regards to the state of Missouri, what are they doing? Do you expect any legislation coming down the pipe from them dealing with this legislation anytime soon?
Well, right now, probably this afternoon, any minute now, the Senate will hear some more debate on the Senate floor about this particular bill. It's Senate Bill 564, and it will be debated again. It's already come up yesterday on the Senate floor. I think you'll hear some more debate about it today. So sometime over the coming weeks, between now and May 18th, when the legislature adjourns for this year's session, regular session,
Okay.
that you'll hear some discussion about it on both the Senate and the House side of the legislature.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you all so much.
Could I
didn't
just
stay
make
this long.
one comment?
Yes.
As far as the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, it's probably not a good talking point for us.
Okay.
Because they were the champion behind SB 43, which is a lot of the reason, we're taking hits in terms of conventions and stuff not coming here, because we're on the no travel list. So just something to put on your radar, and if you have the ear of that organization, I think we would very much appreciate going back on that so we can get some conventions coming here again.
I certainly understand that. Thank you for that feedback.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
I think the Alderwoman from the 20th Ward has a brief presentation, and then we'll hear from John Kauffman with Consumers Council of Missouri.
I'm sorry, I meant to keep these, and I'll just give you those. Okay. Thank you, members of the various committees we have before us. I don't have a presentation for you today, but what I did do is, in full disclosure, many of you know, I'm also the executive director of consumer organization here in the state of Missouri, the Consumers Council of Missouri. We are, in fact, the only residential consumer organization that actively intervenes and speaks on behalf of residential consumers when it comes to utilities, and insofar as legislation and rate increases are concerned. We are the consumer watchdog organization on utilities, and that's why I've asked our lobbyist and our lawyer, John Kauffman, to come speak before you. I won't speak for him, but what I am passing out right now, I invited a couple of groups, in addition to the Consumers Council of Missouri, to come and speak on behalf of these bills, one of which is the Missouri Industrial Energy Consumers. This is a consortium of some of our region's largest employers, many of your friends, who have active concerns about this legislation. In fact, many of our large employers came to the Senate and opposed these bills because they will increase the costs of energy to doing business. This will have a negative impact on our city and our region's economy and can be really harmful to some of our region's largest employers. While they were unable to attend today, they do want to come to our next meeting, and I encourage us to if we do that, we'll make sure they get invited. Another letter here, and actually let me preface that and say that the Post-Dispatch piece here was sent to me by our friends at the MIEC, specifically asked me to hand this out. This is a piece that was put in the Post-Dispatch a couple days ago describing how Senate Bill 564 will raise electric rates. And I encourage you to remember that Senate Bill 564 is being promoted here by our utility companies and not the consumer organizations. The second letter here I have passed out is from the AARP. We're all familiar with the AARP. I encourage you to read this. The AARP also spoke in opposition to Senate Bill 564 before the Senate, recognizing that 564 will have pretty significant increases on the cost of utilities for some of our most vulnerable citizens, our senior citizens. And so with that, I'd like to bring up John Kauffman to describe how these bills will impact the residential consumer, i.e. the constituents that vote us in office.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi. My name is John Kauffman. I'm an attorney, and I represent consumer organizations. My specialty is utilities. I got my start as in the Office of Public Counsel, which is the state consumer agency that's tasked with representing consumer interests at the Public Service Commission. And for about 12 years, I've been on my own representing consumer organizations around the country. I do a lot of work for AARP, for Consumers Council of Missouri, and other organizations. I also taught 6 years energy utility law at WashU School of Law. And so I see a lot of legislation like this, and versions of this proposal have been filed in the state legislature over several years, probably 9 out of the last 13 years. Ameren and other monopoly regulated electric companies have been trying to change the law, in their term, modernize the law. And this particular proposal, like many before it, I don't really think have any need. I really don't think that there's anything that needs to be fixed by this legislation, and we are opposed to it because it would raise electric rates in about 5 different ways. And the rate cap language, certainly as is filed, is of no comfort to me. I have not reviewed the new substitute language, but you know, my concern is that, well, I can get into the rates later, but before I get started, in adding to our concern that there just is no need for this legislation, is the fact that you know, Ameren and other utilities have had a windfall from the Trump tax law that I know that you guys have already mentioned. But that is a huge influx, a cash flow positive that the utility has just received as of January 1st, and as you know, we think that consumers should see that benefit flow through to them as soon as possible, because until that happens, rates are really reflecting a phantom tax, a tax that the utility doesn't have to pay. And I'm not able to do a real precise calculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't tens of millions, perhaps over $100 million a year. And so every month that adjustment does not get made to the benefit of consumers could be, say, $8 to $10 million a year of extra money. And so before that problem is fixed, I have a problem talking about any piece of legislation that would give you know, this regulated monopoly more money. And I guess as to the need, it's important for you to know that investments that are considered smart grid investments are being made. Ameren, you know, brags every year about the investments that they do make in so-called smart grid, things that make the grid improve more efficiently, and that's great. They should be doing that. They are also making investments into cybersecurity. We're not clear exactly what additional money they plan to spend, but it's important to know that we're not talking about a competitive business here. We're talking about a business that is a regulated monopoly and that has been granted this monopoly franchise by the government in return for an obligation to provide service that's safe and adequate. So they have a legal obligation in return for a profit that is generally somewhere between 9 and 10%. The last time it was litigated, they were granted by the Public Service Commission a return on equity of 9.53%. So this legislation does not lower that at all. In fact, the most impactful part of this legislation actually increases the profit or the recovery financially that the utility can make on the investments that they're already making. It's that regulatory liability in there, sometimes called plant in-service accounting, or PISA. It's a type of accounting scheme that has not been adopted by any other state in the country, and would grant the utility more money in recovery for the same level investments that they're already making. Would grant them a deferral and an additional recovery than they're not allowed under the current rules. We talked a little bit about the transmission costs. I understand maybe that's out of the legislation now. The pre-approval, the additional funds, cause us concern as well. If the utility is not already making investments and earning a 9.5% profit on them, we're concerned that they may not be able to prove that they are prudent and that they have a cost benefit to them. So when the government pre-approves or sort of gives them the license to spend on something, our concern is that they'll be spending on above what they need to spend. And one analogy I compare is to the idea of getting an iPhone. Some people like to stand in line and get the new iPhone. Some people like to buy the next technology maybe a year later and get it for half the price. And Ameren has generally been good about getting good prices. And I think an analogy can be made to Ameren, Illinois, where the state legislature there approved so-called smart meter bill, and they now have formula rates. Rates receive not the same audit that it used to have. And they bought smart meters that I think are more expensive than we'll wind up having once they become more affordable here. So I don't think that there's a question of whether or not they need to improve their grid in a cost-efficient way, but we don't want them spending more money than they need to. Our interest here is in residential customers with a particular focus on low-income customers, seniors, people on fixed incomes. And I guarantee you that supporting this legislation is supporting a rate increase. Rates will be higher than they otherwise are. And the rate caps have a lot of problems. They are a soft cap. I haven't read, apparently they've been hardened to some degree, but a soft cap just means that if there's an amount above that cap, you have to wait a year to pay it. And it's charged if, for instance, it would have been a 5% rate increase. You pay 3% this year, but the 2% is on top of whatever you would pay the next year. And rates might not need to be 3% a year. By approving a 3% cap, you might be encouraging the utility to raise rates higher than they would have. There have been several years, even recently, when there have been no rate increases. Even recently where consumers filed complaint and we believe proved that the utility was over-earning and there needed to be a rate reduction. There was frequent rate reductions in the 1990s. And just because there may have been fairly significant rate increases in the previous few years does not necessarily predict what would happen in the future. If consumers may not have any need for a rate increase. I think one of the least reported aspects in utility regulation right now is the fact that we have so much power. We have excess power. There's no need to build any power plants right now, and we think that's a wonderful thing. That means that there is going to be less pressure to raise rates, and as depreciation goes, we might actually see rate reductions going forward. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of these monopoly utilities looking for something to spend their money on, which may not be the most prudent or reasonable thing to do. But they are, because they can't justify building a power plant, they're desperate to find some way to raise rates. But we hope that if you are looking at this state legislation so as to opine upon it, that you would support a resolution that opposed this resolution and that spoke out in favor of your residents and keeping their cost of living reasonable. Missouri does have one of the lowest rates in the Midwest and in the country. We compare very well across the country. Now, rates, I think, should be based on what's cost efficient. We have a relatively low cost of living here, so maybe that's not surprising. But every additional legislative change like this that you add is going to simply increase the amount of money that your constituents have to pay each month at the kitchen table when they're trying to balance their budget. And so if if it does encourage some additional investment, and there might be jobs about that, I think you need to also weigh what the corresponding effect is that. Because if it's additional money that they can't justify spending right now on a cost-benefit analysis, it's additional money that consumers shouldn't be paying for. I could go into more detail. It's a fairly complicated piece of legislation, but it raises rates by, I think, encouraging excessive spending, by changing the accounting for the way they recover costs. And there's also a provision at the end whereby residential customers could be forced to subsidize large industrial customers. And I was kind of heartened when I saw that letter by Senator Leibler that you may have, and I guess that's being promoted by some large customers who are also opposed to the legislation. They point out that they would benefit at the expense of some of the smallest customers on the system. So we definitely don't see a need for this, and we think that it has several provisions that would make rates higher than they otherwise need to be. Be happy to answer any questions.
Alderman Williamson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few.
Yes.
Do you know if anyone at the state legislature right now has an alternative bill or is working on something for the adjustment of senior citizens and low-income people with this soft cap that would guarantee their rates to stay down at a more affordable cost?
I think that the way to keep rates low is to not change a thing. I don't think any legislation is needed. I mean, I suppose
Right now, this is the only, this Senate Bill 564, that's all we got. That's the only bill that's in existence.
I think there's been some legislation filed that I might consider to be pro-consumer instead of anti-consumer, but that hasn't gotten a hearing yet. This particular bill has been kind of rammed through the Republican controlled committee, and so
But you haven't
there's obviously
seen any-
folks in the Republican leadership that want to see this bill voted down.
But no alternative bill other than this one right here. You haven't seen any of. You don't know if any legislators
Yeah,
are working on an alternative bill is what I'm asking.
On what subject? On
Basically, with, you know, the large profit of Ameren Missouri that they'll receive, but something that would lower the cost in general to everybody, but especially seniors and low-income folks.
consumer groups have supported legislation over the years to make certain regulatory changes that would go the other way. You know, it's a balance. The Public Service Commission balances the utilities' interest and the ratepayers' interest. And I think what you're seeing in this bill are a lot of things where the utility would be putting the thumb on the balance scale this way to kind of increase their recovery. There have been some things filed in recent years. There's a bill that was called the Consumer Bill of Rights, and there are some other bills, but those bills have not gotten a hearing in this legislature. The bill, it seems to be only things that we see here are bills that have been written by the regulated monopoly utilities.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So they just haven't come up. Yeah.
If I may, I think that the consumer groups that are looking out for low-income folks are saying they're supporting zero change to the current regulation, and in fact, saying that zero change is better than this change. So we're hoping to keep that sort of stationary rather than introduce a new bill.
I see. All right. Thank you, Alderwoman. Thank you.
Alderman Carl?
I'm good. I'm sorry I've been in and out.
No worries. Alderwoman Green?
No questions, and I'm sorry I have to go to another meeting.
Okay. Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, John, for being here today. You did, I think it's great that you do so much work for consumers across the country, and we're really lucky to have you based here in St. Louis, given all your work across the country, especially as you represent consumers nationwide. One of the things we see in legislation that goes before the state legislature, unlike what happens down here, these bills can change at the drop of a hat, am I right? So can you describe any concerns you have with, even if a rate cap, we describe the rate cap as it is maybe now, we haven't seen it online, we don't know what it looks like, but that process, these bills churn and turn and turn into.
Well, one thing about the Missouri legislature that is kind of a peculiar way that they work, things tend to accumulate other bills. Amendments and kind of omnibus bills begin to develop. And over the last few years, there's been a piece of legislation that kind of includes things that would raise electric rates, things that would raise natural gas rates for Spire, Laclede, and as well as Missouri American Water. And Missouri American Water has a bill that would raise rates that's being heard tomorrow afternoon in Jefferson City. And so I think it's possible that all this legislation could get rolled into a bill that would favor all the monopolies that serve the city of St. Louis and other things. So it's often very difficult. You get a piece of legislation that has so many, maybe a few good things, but 100 bad things in it, and it's hard to really isolate the particular items. I mean, this piece of legislation includes about 5 things. I mean, it's kind of 5 different changes to the regulatory scheme. Ones that I think in general you would see utilities and consumer advocates kind of sparring on, things that would kind of change the rules in their favor. And we think it's unbalanced. We're just advocating that the Public Service Commission continue to do its job. I'm not a big fan of some of the recent decisions of the Public Service Commission. I think they've been kind of leaning too far to the investor and utility side of things. But I think it's more important that the Public Service Commission retain the discretion to make those decisions that they need to make when the consumer really needs to be protected. There's the energy, things in the energy world change so fast. Few people predicted that natural gas was going to be so cheap a few years ago. So a few people before that predicted, and there's just always, these waves of things that happen. The economic downturn, natural disasters, changes in technology. This industry is really prone to a lot of disruption and things that could have significant impact on consumers. And with the Public Service Commission having a broad discretion to be able to step in and say, we're going to protect consumers, we're not going to let these costs be passed on, we're going to hold them to a higher standard of prudence and reasonableness, I think is in our best interest, and not kind of confine their decisions and force them into some sort of a scheme. And I think 5 years is too long. In my experience, sometimes you can make regulatory agreements over maybe 2 or 3 years, but things change so fast in energy that I am very reluctant to recommend a 5-year plan on anything.
Utilities are for-profit companies, am I right? They have investors, and they get a profit at the end of the day. They enjoy a monopoly status. In other words, you don't have a choice in who brings your electricity to your home. You get a monopoly status in exchange for being regulated by the government. Is that correct?
Right.
So it's the government's responsibility to set the rates that they're allowed to charge to make sure that there's some fairness associated with it. Now, of course, as you pointed out, their investors still receive a 9 to 10% sort of profit on top of providing that service to consumers, but it's the government, the state of Missouri, the Public Service Commission's responsibility to set those rates that are fair. And if we're changing the rules by which the Public Service Commission can or cannot set those rates and adjust them for fairness, then those rates can be higher, and our residents can pay more than they would otherwise need to for a service that they can't really go and shop around to see if they could find a better deal. They're just stuck with the one provider. Am I right?
That's right. This is a company that doesn't have to compete for consumers. They have various business expenses already kind of smoothed out. They have a fuel adjustment clause, which means that they can just pass along their fuel costs. Those don't have to be audited in a rate case. So they have a lot of their business expenses kind of protected by the rules already as it is. And if we go any further in modernizing this or streamlining this system, I think there needs to also be a discussion about whether the rate of return of, say, 9.5 needs to be more commensurate with the lower risk that they have.
My concern with passing a resolution supporting a bill that is being that has been introduced by the Republican Missouri State Legislature is that this thing could change on the floor in such a way we have no idea what could come out. And then we would be responsible for passing something that supports something that we know at the end of the day will have increases associated with it on our residents. And then we're going to have to answer questions. Why did you support, my electricity bill's going up? Why did you support something that would do that? And we're not even the appropriate body to be deliberating these things. So I have concerns that maybe this is not the best way to go about getting additional support. The consumer organizations, AARP, our friends at the large employers have reservations about this legislation, and without having the full deliberative body to go and even look at the newest amended version before us, we're sort of at a loss as to be able to really look at this thing in detail. We don't even have the current bill before us. So for that reason, I'm expressing my concerns with moving forward as a St. Louis City legislative body on this topic.
Alderwoman Navarro?
Thank you. Given your background in energy policy, what are other utilities doing in order to invest in renewable energy?
Well, I think most states have some type of renewable portfolio standard by legislation or by, statewide initiative in the state and or by the regulatory commission. I think that those RPS renewable portfolio standards have been very positive, and they've edged utilities forward, and now we're seeing reductions in both wind and solar costs. Mostly my representation is just on the rates themselves, affordability. We sometimes oppose increasing the rates, whether it's nuclear power, coal power, or wind power. We don't really choose a favorite resource amongst those. But I think diversity is good, and we're glad to see Ameren moving towards diversity. For a while there, they had 80% coal production. I think diversity is very important, and I think maybe they could have started earlier in the move towards renewable energy, but we're glad that they are in the direction that they're now moving.
And do you see opportunities to save ratepayers money through energy efficiency investments as well, and improvements in that area?
Yes, there's already, this is another surcharge on the bill that was passed in 2011, I believe, in the legislature. You might see a separate surcharge on your bill for energy efficiency. So there's a significant amount of money that is flowed from ratepayers to the utility to do programs and give rebates for consumers, as well as lost revenues. They actually get a certain amount of money on your bill to recover for estimated amount of money that they're losing because of energy efficiency. So we think that's a very generous program in place, and it has had some results, although there's constant debate about what are the most efficient type of programs. Sometimes I think they get a little complicated. Sometimes I would just like to give every customer a Nest thermostat or something. There's some very simple things that people can do to conserve and so forth. But whatever we can do just to keep the rates overall low helps everyone. As an advocate for low-income energy customers, LIHEAP is a great program, and the Keeping Current program. I have to say this about Ameren, because I guess I'm said some critical things about their proposal, but they run a very good supplemental low-income program called Keeping Current, and they actually contribute significant amount of money to that, as much as or almost as much as the ratepayers do. And so they have, we're actually asking other regulated utilities in the state to emulate what Ameren has been able to do in collaboration. So they do some really good programs. They also have very good reliability. They have just top-tier reliability across the country. Last time we checked, Ameren Missouri actually had better reliability indicators in Ameren, Illinois, where they have all the supposedly the latest, most modern smart grid materials. And so if there is going to be any indicator about what investment needs to be made or what additional investment needs to be made, we would hope that that would be tied to actual reliability standards, things that we can quantify. They call it SAIDI and SAFE numbers, which are, the SAIDI is the duration and the SAFE is the frequency of the outages. But we're not we're not really seeing this distinction, or we don't really understand, what the additional needs are. We see investments being made at the current time that I think need to be made and are modernizing the grid. I don't know if there's any particular technology that you'd like to see, but that we're not unhappy with the way things are going, and are concerned that if we go down this particular regulatory path, we might have rates that are higher than they need to be. I know sometimes people don't realize it, but rates, like I said, rates do go down, and we may be going into a period where, due to depreciation, electric rates need to come down. That would be a huge economic benefit. The low cost of living is one of the few economic benefits I see to this region, and so I think we should be very protective of it.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Christine,
Alderwoman Middlebrook? Alderman Vaccaro?
So, I have 2 farms, and I'm co-ops on both. We're not with Ameren. What stops Ameren from doing the stuff that Inter-County does and, trying to think of the other co-op? They will pay for a hot water heater to be put in if it's energy efficient. And when we pay our rates into there, if there's any profit, they send us a check back.
Right, yeah.
So
Yeah,
who- they
electric
take the
co-ops are
electric-
regulated very differently. Ameren is for-profit, and so the theory of electric co-ops is that they're owned by their members, and there's customer
Right.
credits come back, yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, because I did.
And
we-
they
we
elect,
had-
they
we
elect
had-
their board, yeah.
Yeah, we have two different co-ops, and both of them, it seems like the electric's cheaper, and at the end of the year, we still get a check back.
They tend to have very different rate structures between kind of large customers and small and farms and different sizes. But they also have a different ratio of customers to investment. They have longer lines within the less populated areas. So it's a little bit different mix. But with Ameren, the other, the flip side of Ameren and for-profit investor-owned companies is that you're paying that additional profit, that 9 to 10% profit.
Right, so you're paying, so, anyway, I just was bringing that up because when she said, talked about that, one of the things I'm saying, there are throughout the state, different, and what I think is cool about them is no matter what, we get money back if they're making money.
Well, and again, I think that before anything passes relating to these regulated utilities at all, we need to get their rates to reflect the new lower corporate tax that President Trump gave them. And I mean, if the question here, and I haven't really seen a financial case for it, but if there's a case that they aren't making enough money, they just had a huge windfall just drop in their lap.
So, throughout the state of Missouri, how much of the territory does Ameren cover?
In Missouri?
In the
Well,
state of
they're-
Missouri,
they're-
what,
they're,
I mean, are you half
They're the
the energy?
largest regulated provider. They're not, it's not a blanket area, but they stretch out throughout I mean, maybe you could,
Well, I mean,
they
are
stretch
you
even into kind of the
half-
northwest
half-
part of Missouri, but they.
Half the state, or, I know again, in the middle of the
there's-
state,
I mean, Kansas City Power and Light Company is not quite as big, but they're second biggest on the western side of the state. So those two are the big electric for-profit companies. But they also have maybe as many customers over in Illinois that's regulated differently. They have, the power companies are not owned by, the power plants are not owned by Ameren in Illinois, and they have a formula rate system.
how many co-ops are there in the state? I'm aware of 2.
I don't know. He might have 15, I don't know, something like that. Sure.
I'm aware of 2 co-ops, because I'm in both of them.
So basically, there are the investor-owned electrics we talked about, Ameren, Missouri, Kansas City Power and Light, Empire District Electric near Joplin. There are 47 rural electric cooperatives in the state of Missouri, and the last data I saw, Ameren, Missouri's rates were lower than all but 2 of those 47. When you look at the municipal utilities, there are 85 of those. So the city of Kirkwood, Hannibal, Springfield, Columbia, those are owned and operated by cities. So there are 3 different types of utilities in the state. The only ones regulated and governed by the Missouri Public Service Commission are the investor-owns.
Okay, I must be, the 2 I'm in must be the 2 that are cheaper for some.
We'll talk.
Inter-County and, I can't think, Black River.
I don't recall off the top of my head. We'll have to look. We have that data.
Okay, anyway, I was just curious.
A rebuttal comment to close? No?
That's fine.
Okay.
Wait,
Guys,
5 minutes or less.
Sure, this will be
Great.
about 60 seconds. I just want you to know that the rate provisions of Senate Bill 564 or House Bill 1575 give full, in fact, increasing Public Service Commission oversight. There would be nothing that would go outside of the normal purview. Granted, increases could be capped at 3%, but they're not automatic pass-throughs. They would still, all of our regulatory rate reviews would go before the Missouri Public Service Commission, and they have an 11-month review process. So this is not an attempt to skirt around that. In fact, it would tighten the regulations rather than loosen them.
Any questions?
And I'm thinking 3% caps are certainly better than the 6% annual increases we've seen per year for the last 10 years. So that's why we've proposed them, because our customers have asked for that. Again, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
You can, yeah.
You know, the 3% rate caps, is there any reason why Ameren wouldn't just elect to do that voluntarily? As you said, your customers are looking for you to not increase their rates at 6%. Couldn't Ameren just voluntarily decide, hey, our customers don't want to see these rate increases, we got a 10% profit last quarter, we're not going to do rate increases. You don't need legislation to prevent you from not going before the Public Service Commission and asking for rate increases.
We do need the legislation to support the plant and service accounting. That's what allows for the additional energy grid investment that we don't have today.
And we would be the first state in the country to implement that right there, which is a way for you to invest without proving that that investment is wise.
No, the investments would still be all reviewed by the PSC for prudency. Every capital project we would do would still be packaged and presented to the PSC for review and approval.
But my point is that the rate caps that Ameren is pointing to as being the best part of this legislation is something that Ameren could do voluntarily with or without this legislation. And the reason that you pointed to for wanting to pass this, the PISA, Missouri would be the first state in the entire country. This is a new mechanism that is uncharted waters for utilities and states alike. And I'm really hesitant for a body like ours to even weigh in on something that is totally, we can't even look at another state who does this, because no other state does this. And we are just not that deliberative of a body here in the city of St. Louis. We don't even have the legislation before us. And to introduce a completely new accounting system is something I don't think we're prepared to really go into depth about.
I understand. I would like to show you what the 46 other states who have passed energy policy legislation have done.
But it is not a PISA.
Some have
This-
plant and service accounting, some have formula rates, some have performance-based rates. In fact, this is probably the least progressive tool in the toolkit the PSC would have compared to what many other states have already implemented.
But this PISA has already been rejected by our Public Service Commission here in the state of Missouri several times. This is not something that the oversight body in the state of Missouri wants to implement, nor should implement, because we have there is no track record for this performing well in other states. And that is a concern I have. The rate caps that Ameren is touting is something you could do voluntarily, and I invite you to do with or without this legislation.
I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. Thanks again
Okay.
for your time.
Yes, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.